Hi, Eva.
Hey, Louis, good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you for joining me for a few minutes of conversation. Curious conversation today.
Pleasure.
Great. So, first of all, for those of us that are listening live or hearing this recording later, just to introduce you, you're my friend and my colleague, Eva Cruz, who is the CEO and founder of the Global Fashion Agenda, as well as the Copenhagen Fashion Summit. And tell us a little bit about those organizations or the work that you're doing.
Right. So, to put it short, which is always difficult with things that you're really passionate about, right? So the movement for us in terms of working on how to mobilize and guide the fashion industry towards more sustainability, and that's where you and I also meet, starts when we kicked off Copenhagen Fashion Summit back in 2009. And the occasion was that Copenhagen was hosting the UN Climate Summit. So it became sort of a good idea to also put up a political convening discussing how this industry is impacting the world, climate, environmentally, but definitely also socially. And that sort of started the journey. And then eventually we organized ourselves as the Global Fashion Agenda, which is a nonprofit based here in Copenhagen, but working globally with a number of partners, putting out reports, but doing advocacy work and policy lobbying. And, you know, trying to, together with partners like we have with AII and others, to lead and guide the industry and put out thought leadership as to how we can think bigger and think more smart about, how to utilize the powers of fashion, because it's a really interesting industry when you think about the volume, the impact, but certainly also how it influences how we think about things. Even if people are not fashion victims per se, we're still influenced by the industry. And I think that's one of the reasons it's such an interesting industry to work with, because it's a strong communication tool.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking a lot about fashion as an art form, and art as a reflection of the times in which it's produced. And it's also a way we convey message and meaning and storytelling, which I want to dive into that a little bit too, and values. But why was it that sustainability spoke to you? I mean, personally, what was going on with you in your life? What was happening? Or why did you get pulled into this kind of work?
Well, I think some of it origins from my upbringing. I have two very engaged parents, both coming from the political side, socialists. My dad is an architect and an artist, and my mom has been driving the women's movement since the 60s, and they were part of that like flower power revolution. And so I think they've taught me to always be, you know, critical about the world and my surroundings, and always try to do better and try to make positive impact, and obviously always having that lens of both environmental and social impact. And then eventually in my late teens or beginning of my 20s, I fell into fashion. This was definitely not their appetite. I started out by being a TV host. I had TV shows. I have been in talk shows and fashion shows, and also eventually ended up in magazines, where I've editor-in-chief of a fashion magazine for many years. And I think they kind of coped with it, but they were always sort of questioning me in terms of, don't you want to do more with life? And then eventually I was part of inaugurating an organization that wanted to lift Danish design talent in fashion, and we built Copenhagen Fashion Week as a pretty big today convening for Scandinavian fashion, and exhibiting thousands of brands from that region to the world, and that was sort of my contact with the industry. I a little bit into what is it with this industry, and I think this is in the early 2000s, so we didn't have a lot of data. There wasn't a lot of reports. We knew that child labor was probably on the agenda, but then I actually started diving a little bit into it, and then I found out that it had so much, dirt in its supply chain, and it became sort of what sparked it for me to look at, how can we do that in a better way? But in the beginning, it was really difficult to get people to even want to talk about this.
I bet.
Not least at the summit, but also even in small convenings, people were like, don't talk too loud about it. And I think maybe also because they knew whenever I started talking, it was pretty loud. So they were a little bit afraid that I was going to, pull their pants down, as we say. and show what they had. Yeah.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about how this movement of sustainable fashion is now, 10 to 15 years in. We've really seen a transition from that early day of let's not talk about it, or let's not expose, or this is a superficial, industry category. Why are we focusing on that? To really having this be one of the primary topics that's out there now. When we talk about sustainability, we talk about this industry. How have you seen that change happen, in terms of like the decade? What do you think? How would you characterize that shift?
Well, I think the funny thing is that what you're mentioning is exactly maybe that the biggest shift has come from the fact that transparency and traceability are basically textbook one when you want to dive into sustainability. And that's the first thing that we didn't have. People were working as more isolated islands. There wasn't much collaboration across between companies or across borders. And I think those barriers have sort of come down as a positive result of people actually realizing that to crack these nuts, like the sustainability big topics, environmentally and socially, we have to work together. No one man, no one company, no one country, or no one organization can do it on their own. So I think that's been a major shift. It was really difficult back in 2009 to get anybody to take the stage and speak about what we called CSR back then, corporate social responsibility. But some of them who are actually still amongst the front runners. It was PPR Group, Caring now, H&M, there was Eden back then. Do you remember Bono had a brand?
I do.
Together with Ellie Hewson. And there were some who, and some of them are still around, who were willing to actually talk about the work that they did and also about the work that they hadn't control over. And I think that was maybe some of the first steps, that there were a couple of people who were actually open and sharing and acknowledging that perfect cannot stand in the way of doing good. And I think that's something that we've also realized over years, that's a really key thing, that please don't stop, even though you don't think that you can be perfect at it, and don't stop communicating about it, because at the end of the day, it's a whole chain of people or institutions, or the whole systemic change that needs to move with us in this. So we have to talk about also the things that are difficult. We have to talk to politicians to help us create a level playing field. We have to talk to consumers so that they understand the difference between products, because at the end of the day, this is also an industry that comes down to product, right? And if we don't love it, we won't buy it regardless of how well it's made. That would at least be my argument.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about that, the topic of sort of the citizen, the individual, the person who's buying the products, it really is about connecting it to personal values, right? I mean, we may say the biggest barrier is we don't have enough investment, or we need to change the policy. But at the end of the day, it's also about humans actually recognizing that they want to express their own personal values through the choices they make and the things they wear on their body, right? I mean, so how do you see that playing out? Are you hopeful?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting conversations that has maybe rose during COVID. Mm-hmm. It feels like 2020 has been sort of a year where a layer has been peeled off, and even the ugly things stand out. Trump, or Black Lives Matter movement, things that we really needed to look at but had sort of turned a blind eye to, has come out. And I think this has also made us reflect internally in fashion about value. Yeah. What has value to us? What about this train that is just running with 220 kilometers an hour, pushing out collections, 52 of them a year, or drops that are completely not in tune with the season, like pre-fall goods arriving on the shelves in April, then forcing retailers to mark down perfectly, suitable seasonal goods that are on the shelf, and shortening the shelf life of product. And that whole shift in discussion, I think, has come out of a crisis situation like this, where we were also stuck with so much inventory and, people suffering from overproduction and sitting there with all these dead goods that was difficult to get into value. So I think that is the value discussion is really interesting, and I really feel that we have an opportunity, if we play it well, to not just rebuild the system as it used to be, but actually take a step back and look at what actually creates value, and how can fashion again, or apparel, become a commodity that we value. It's sort of become something that we take and use very little and then dispose. Absolutely. So it all of a sudden has no value. And this is not even really anything to do with price points. But I do believe that price points has a lot to play in that as well, because it unfortunately is to overproduce and mark down. And I wish it wasn't. I wish, instead of people buying 3 or 5 because it's discounted, let's come back to buying one and appreciating it a little bit more. And I think this is some of the shifts that we can have on the agenda right now with the industry, because we're at this sort of low and a little bit of a pause where there's maybe also a little bit of space mentally to reflect and consider what value means. And I think a lot of us have been, spending a little bit less in this period of time, figuring out with our, families matters. I miss traveling, but I don't miss traveling 2 or 3 times a month. Honestly, I don't want to go back to that. So if we could do that with all parameters in life, maybe we can actually come to a place that is a little bit more sustainable.
Absolutely. I love that. And in that is not only the value of a product, but it's the values that we kind of relate to that, and placing meaning on anything means it becomes important. And then shared economies and rental economies and all these things start to flourish because you're really placing a higher value on something. It's not this fast disposable product. It really has. Have you yourself had other feelings that way as well, about things that has more value to you during this time? Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what I started kind of playing around with the idea, because we're on these Zoom calls all the day, of like going into the closet and just pulling out that thing I haven't even worn for a while. I even got to where, even in my business trips, I wasn't like being creative enough. And I thought, there's enough things in here to be kind of actually fun and new. And I think just kind of re-engaging and having a relationship with the stuff that I already owned, moving it around, whether it's in the living room space or whatever, and just really kind of reconnecting, because here we are with our 4 walls and all of our stuff. So now we get to actually be with it and really think about meaning, right? Yeah, for sure. So I'll say you're a hero to me, because I think the way you've used your voice and your position in the world and your motherhood and your friendship has just been really inspiring to me. And I wanted to let you know that, but at the same time, I'm curious to know, who are those people that have really inspired you and kept you going in this work?
Oh, there's many. I don't even know where to start. But you are one of them for sure. And other people like Jason Kippy, but certainly also a lot of my team members, but also my kids. And in particular, maybe my 18-year-old daughter who loves fashion, but also just watching how she's a completely different consumer than I am. She doesn't cling to things. I own things, and I actually have a little bit difficulty letting go of things, which makes it pile up too much. She has an organic wardrobe where things keep coming in, and she sells them and resells them and buys new and so on. So she has a completely different way to go about things. There's so many visionary people out there. There's some politicians out there that I think, are doing great stuff. But I think I've always been, really inspired by what you can do in groups, and how movements and, feeling part of something inspires. So sometimes it's not even just single people, but more like trends and things that are happening in society, and how we tap into those consciously or unconsciously, and how that can help drive and inspire us.
I love that you mentioned your daughter, because as you know, was inspired by the youth fashion movement at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, and hearing from your people about what they do and don't want for the future. I think this is one of the first times in history where we're not just having a generation and everyone behind them kind of gets impacted. Like you mentioned, your parents and that sort of 60s, 70s movement, and then all of us are influenced by that. I think we're being influenced by the generations below us. I think there's this sort of flipped mentorship thing that's happening that is really kind of fascinating. And we can look to younger people to actually help guide us towards, this is the reality of their world, right? We kind of knew a world where we could pretend none of this was happening. Now it's like, you can't pretend this isn't happening, right?
No.
From pandemic, social justice, climate crisis, it's real, right? And they're impacting and they're influencing us, as I guess what I'm hearing you say.
Totally. And, you know, honestly, I'm humbled by by how fast things are moving and platforms that I almost don't get. I mean, I TikTok, for instance, but becoming so powerful. A friend told me that the Goethe Institute in Germany is going to join TikTok. I'm like, how? But you know, it's becoming such an interesting media picture that we're looking at as well, because people are sourcing, people are their own editors, and everybody basically can be a media and share thinking, and we can connect globally as well, which is also such a different place to be than it was 10, 15 years ago, where we weren't connected in the same sense. So I really feel empowered by that, and the idea that maybe instead of thinking in countries and within borders, we have to think about where are all the like-minded peoples across the world who can help drive different processes, and how can we buy and wear the change we want to see, and how can we, how does all of that link? I think that's so exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, TikTok is a funny one because, I sort of shunned it for a while, thinking I'm either, not the right age demographic or it's silly. But what I've realized from it is how much tremendous creativity there is out there, an amazing world of creative humans. And one of the things that's trending tremendously is upcycling apparel and people taking items and refashioning and making, designers taking old quilts from 100 years ago and making coats and jackets out of them. And this is like taking off. And so it's like, look at how a medium like TikTok can actually transform a generation's relationship, particularly during a pandemic when you're sitting at home with old quilts and a sewing machine, right? Kind of amazing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, it's exciting times. We're coming up time.
We're coming up on time, and we could do this for an hour. And maybe I'll have you back in the future. So tell me, like, what's next for you? What's coming up?
Yeah, what's coming up? Well, actually, I've just given in the notice to resign from my position as CEO of Global Fashion Agenda after building it as my life's work, and obviously the last 15 years it's been my life. And it was not an easy decision, but I felt that it's time for me to shift gear and be part of the same mission, the same vision, but from the corporate side, as I've been doing it from, you could say, the non-corporate or NGO side. So I'm going to remain connected to the Global Fashion Agenda with a seat on the board, and I'm going to join Pangaea, which is this startup company. It's a materials science brand that has started investing in different biotech, material science, and innovations to drive sustainable products, but also to help design a better future. And over the last year, they've caught up a lot of attention on their track pants and hoodies and so on, because I guess that's the uniform everybody has worn throughout the year. But it's a very ambitious project with multiple businesses that is on its way, and it's equally ambitious as what I've been doing until now. It's just on the other side of the table, and I feel it's about time that I walk the talk. Yeah, I've been preaching how to do it, so now it's time to prove that it's actually doable, and to make business out of it as well.
Well, I think that's very exciting. We actually have a call coming up with them soon, AII, and so that's exciting to be connecting in and learning more about their work. And what a great organization for you to be joining, but how fortunate they are to have your talent and leadership coming over there. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Yeah.
So any parting words to our listeners today, or call to action that you might have for us?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think we've all started a new year with high expectations and optimism. And then I think we all felt, at least here in Europe, because COVID is really still, blowing us off course, that things have started at a little slow pace, but I do believe that we should keep the optimism. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We're coming at, vaccine is being implemented during spring. Things will pick up in a different way. We'll be healthy and traveling and connected again, because I really feel that the last year has also shown us how social we are as beings. And even though this was wonderful to see you this way, Louis, I'd much rather, be drinking tea in a nice place with you and having, the human connection as well. So I think keep the optimism. We're going to get there, and hopefully, also with more wise sentiment and the idea to build something stronger than what we left, because it was certainly not a resilient business model we had going for ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's no doubt we're a changed people now as a result of this, and we'll know more as time unfolds. Mm-hmm. So, Eva, thank you so much for being our inaugural guest on Louis and Friends Curious Conversations, and lots of blessings to you. I know we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah, lovely seeing you.
Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.